Thanks, Cassie. Well, good morning, everybody. It's terrific to be here. I was in New Zealand on vacation with my family just in January, and when we took off from the airport, I wasn't thinking I'd be back so soon. But I'm very happy to be because the subject of this conference is so very important. You know, we have a tremendous opportunity with AI to really improve people's lives. But we'll be able to do that only if we build AI in an ethical manner. There's been a worldwide conversation on this topic over the past couple of years, which Microsoft has participated in. And what I'd like to do this morning is take a little time to describe to you how Microsoft is thinking about the subject, and I hope that will stimulate your own thinking as well. So, we have hype cycles in the tech industry, but AI doesn't feel like hype. We're talking about a form of intelligence, and that seems pretty fundamental. So for the first time, as we saw last night in the demos, we're endowing computers with capabilities once reserved for people. The ability to see, the ability to hear, the ability to really understand our input. So this could be as important as other fundamental technological advances like the printing press or electricity or the internet. Each of these has deeply enriched our lives, but at the same time, each of these brought new societal issues. We're grappling with some of the issues around the internet right now. It connects all of us instantly and efficiently together, but by virtue of that, also enables hateful, divisive messages to spread. And so we want to ask for AI, what kinds of issues will it raise? And in particular, as AI systems start acting like people, giving us recommendations, advising us on things, how will those systems impact real people? This is pretty challenging because, philosophers and faith leaders have discussed ethics issues for eons. And yet now we need to find a way to resolve some of those questions in zeros and ones. And the stakes are really high because, as so many of us at this conference today, believe, AI can be so beneficial, but by virtue of being so powerful, the potential downsides could be great too. And it's interesting as we embark on all this to think about, the attitudes of many people outside the tech industry and some even within the tech industry. AI seems a little scary to people. Like even the name isn't good, right? Artificial intelligence. It was named in the 1950s when artificial didn't have the negative connotation that it has today. A better term might be computational intelligence. But even that, to many people, sounds cold, calculating, and it is calculating. And it seems like it's some distant thing. And it probably is distant. It's probably running on a server someplace. And it seems a bit mysterious. Like, what are these algorithms? Like, just the term algorithm almost has a negative connotation these days. And then to top it all off, there's this sense all over the world, really growing in the past year or two, that AI is coming from some technological elite whose values may not be in line with those of the rest of the world. Even employees of tech companies are kind of feeling the same thing. There's story after story about this. Tech's frightful five. They've got us. Some of this is about AI. Some of it's about privacy. Some of it's about data collection. Some of it's about the role of social media. Some of it's about the sheer size and influence of a small number of firms. And even tech employees are voicing concern. So at Google, a number of their employees expressed concern about AI work they were doing that related to defense contracting. And Google took a decision to end some of that work. At Microsoft, we faced a backlash this summer at the height of the immigration crisis at the Mexican border. We had a marketing blog that got a little carried away with itself and made it sound as if Microsoft was working with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency to use advanced AI techniques at the border. And this caused a great backlash. Now, it turned out that the actual arrangement was mainly use of Office, Microsoft Office, it was email and calendar and the like. But that still just sort of illustrates the concerns people had. In the United States, Amazon has been licensing its facial recognition software pretty broadly in law enforcement contexts. And civil rights groups have expressed concerns about this. The American Civil Liberties Union is concerned that the software could be used to target minorities, and they say it doesn't even work that well. So they tested the software against the whole US Congress and said that it provided matches to the mugshots of 28 criminals. Now, to be fair, Amazon said that the ACLU misused the software. But again, it just sort of illustrates the concerns that people have. Now, I'm a lawyer, and so one interesting aspect of all of this to me is that none of those three examples I just gave really raised any legal issues. There was no claim of wrongdoing. We're in the realm of ethics now. How should we build AI systems in an ethical way? Are there some things that we simply shouldn't build at all? And this is pretty challenging for tech firms to deal with, but of course, we must. And so where do we start? What are the highest level values we're trying to uphold? And right away, this gets challenging because values differ around the world, of course. And yet tech companies are so often operating at a global scale. AI models really know no borders, data flows. So do we look more to Confucius or do we look more to Socrates? And this isn't like a theoretical point, right? We've already seen in China, there was a reference to this last night, their social credit scoring system. And decisions on the trade-off between privacy and public safety that most countries in the West wouldn't make. So how do we move forward? Well, at Microsoft, we're starting with just the very fundamental proposition that AI is good. We want to deploy it broadly to help solve the world's problems. But people will only use AI if they trust it. And so we need to focus on building systems that people will trust. Now, this is not a profound point, right? Every company needs to build trustworthy products. But trust in AI is especially important because AI systems will affect people in so many ways. And AI systems about people depend upon data about people. And people won't share that data unless they trust the system. So how do we build trust? While values vary across the world, there are some that are universal, and we can look to them. So as the speaker from Canberra was saying last night, we just celebrated in December the 70th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It's a long document. It came together in the aftermath of World War II. It has withstood the test of time. And we can look to that document and see values that can help inform us in building AI systems. The equality of all people, the right to privacy, and freedom of association. So, with these values in mind, how is Microsoft going about trying to build trustworthy systems? And I would break it down really into three parts. The first is that we're designing AI systems to augment human abilities. Think of a doctor who's trying to make a diagnosis, and the patient has a very rare condition the doctor may never have seen before, but the AI system will know about that condition. AI holds great promise for us because computers think, and I'll put that in air quotes, they think differently than we do. Computers are really good at probabilistic reasoning, but people are kind of famously not so good at that. Computers never forget anything, but of course people are forgetful. And yet computers lack human abilities like empathy and judgment and caring. And so we have an opportunity as an industry to marry the best of computer abilities with the best of human abilities. The second is, we're really trying to make AI available to everybody. Microsoft is building a wide range of AI-related products for organizations of every size and for end users. And as we do all of that, all of the underlying services that we're building, we're exposing out as a set of platform services. So developers can build applications on top. And this is very deep in Microsoft's DNA because we're a platform company at heart. And the third is, we're really working hard to articulate ethical principles to guide our developers. We believe living up to these kinds of principles will be essential if AI is to thrive. And this is where I'd like to spend most of my time now. So we've articulated 6 core principles that we believe should govern AI. AI systems should be fair, they should be reliable and safe, they should respect privacy and be secure, they should be inclusive of all people. And underlying all of this, they should be transparent so we can understand if progress is being made on the top 4. And the companies building AI systems should be accountable. Now, having a principle is great. Of course, it doesn't tell us how any particular ethical issue should be resolved when you have close questions. What I'd like to do now is just give you a little flavor for the kinds of questions that come up. Let's start with fairness. So AI systems will be used to make predictions about people. Some of those predictions will inform decisions about people, and some of those decisions will be important matters. Most countries have laws prohibiting discrimination in housing, employment, and the like. So at a bare minimum, we need to make sure that AI systems adhere to those laws. But we need to go further, too. We need to make sure that, more broadly, AI systems treat everybody fairly. And you might think that a computer system would be free of human biases. We saw a slide last night from the IBM speaker showing just a subset of all the human biases that people have. Computers should be free of those, and so we do have an opportunity harnessing computer power to make the world more fair. And yet we know, it's very, very clear, that bias can creep into AI systems. It can happen if the training data is not representative of the population at large, for example. Or it can happen if the training data is representative, but reflects structural racism or sexism in society, in which case the AI system could inadvertently perpetuate that. And there are other ways that bias can creep in as well. An example often discussed in the AI community is a simple search for the term, image search for the term CEO. I ran this on my home computer just a couple of weeks ago. And as you can see, it returns images almost exclusively of white men. And this reflects the data that search engines are working with. Most of the images on the internet of CEOs are white men because most CEOs are white men. But what kind of a signal does this send to young people, to young women, to people of color, about their role in society? And so one could imagine tweaking this some to provide a more balanced representation of different demographics. But then, of course, we'd have a tech company arguably distorting reality for some particular set of values at some particular place and time. Do we want tech companies taking on that role? On the other hand, there was an academic paper a couple of years ago that said these search results were even more heavily skewed towards white men than is reality. We wouldn't want that either. Here's an example that is like sort of hot off the presses, some academic research done with LinkedIn, which is a Microsoft company. So as you know, LinkedIn is an employment recruiting tool. And some researchers wanted to understand, does what they termed the female modesty effect show up on LinkedIn, and is it quantifiable? The female modesty effect is this sense that women, on average, are less likely to promote themselves than men. And the researchers found, by looking at various data fields in LinkedIn, there's some where you just check a box, and there's some where there's an open data field and you promote yourself. They found that, indeed, the female modesty effect did appear, and it was quantifiable. And so what we're seeing on the slide is, for each business school in the United States, the data points to the left reflect where the women at those schools were less likely to fill out the open data fields than the men. Now, an AI system looking for candidates for jobs might take that as a negative signal. But armed with this knowledge of differences between men and women in psychology in this regard, the employment recruiting tools can be adjusted to account for this. Let's talk about second principle, reliability and safety. I mean, this has always been a big issue for technology. Think about cars. They came along in the 19-teens, and it was only over succeeding decades that we really built out a whole set of safety rules around cars. It was in the 1960s that Ralph Nader famously published Unsafe at Any Speed. So reliability came up recently in the news in connection with facial recognition software. Microsoft and other firms offer classifiers. Input a face, and output is the person likely male or female. These systems are pretty accurate overall, but what researchers from MIT wanted to study was, are they accurate on various subpopulations? Men, women, dark-skinned people, and light-skinned people. And the answer was no. So the study found that in the Microsoft software, for dark-skinned women, the error rate was 21%, whereas it was less than 1% for white men. And it was as high as 35% in other classifiers. So this was really a learning experience for the Microsoft engineers. They got together with researchers at our basic research labs who study bias in AI systems and looked into this. And what they found was, and you might not be surprised, but what they found was the training data was not sufficient to the task. The training data had many, many images of white men, not enough images of dark-skinned women who were tagged as to gender. And it's actually sort of hard to find large data sets of that. But they went out and found the data sets. They adjusted the classifier in other ways. And just, I think it was last month, the researchers came back, they retested the software and found that the error rate now for dark-skinned women was down to 2%. And so the lesson is, with care and attention, this sort of thing can be improved. Third principle, privacy and security. These concerns obviously extend well beyond AI. But they're critical to AI because AI depends upon data, including data about people. This is a really challenging area because as so much of our lives is being digitized, we're sort of being flooded with notices around how data is being used and collected, and it becomes almost impractical to keep up with all of those notices. And yet that's the whole paradigm for privacy regulation. In the context of AI, though, there's still another concern, which is the ability of AI systems to infer things about us that are true, but that we did not choose to disclose. So even apart from the notice and consent paradigm, AI can go and learn things about us. An example of this in the news a few years ago was a retailer in the United States, Target. Based on purchase patterns, it could determine whether a woman was pregnant very early in her pregnancy. And in the story here in the news, Target was able to determine that a teenage girl was pregnant and was sending advertising flyers to her home before her father knew, and she was living at home with her father. She was 16. So the ability of AI systems to learn these kinds of things is profound. Or a social media site might be able to infer your gender orientation, even if you didn't disclose it. And so we have to ask, are there limits on the kinds of things that we should allow AI systems to infer? What kinds of consent should be required? Part of the answer to some challenges will be the development of really strong anonymization techniques. So where we don't need to know the identity of a particular person, we can anonymize the data and still work with it and learn things that will be societally beneficial. Fourth is inclusiveness. We want AI systems to be inclusive of everybody. In part, this means we want AI to help improve accessibility for people with disabilities. There's a tremendous opportunity here because there's more than 1 billion people around the world who have a disability of some kind or another. You know, if computers are good at vision now, imagine how that can help the blind. If they're good at hearing, imagine how that can help deaf people. If you were at the conference last year, you saw an application that a colleague of mine presented called Seeing AI. It's available for the iPhone. And it enables blind people to hear, because the system is seeing, what's going on around them. It describes people, their facial expressions, gives you a sense of their age. It can read menus to you. Incredibly helpful. We believe that AI will have a more profound impact on people with disabilities over the next 5 years than on anyone else. Now, underlying all this is two kind of foundational principles. One is transparency. We won't be able to identify if progress is being made on these first 4 issues unless we build AI systems in a way that are transparent. And as people were saying last night, this is really, really challenging, but also really important. And let me give you an example from the healthcare context that will illustrate this. So in the mid-1990s, researchers built a deep neural net to try to study the risk of patients dying from pneumonia. And the idea is that this would inform then hospitals on how to allocate their resources and who to admit to the hospital. They had a great data set, 10 million patients, so lots of data. And the model they built was highly accurate on the test data, but because it was a neural net, it was opaque. So the researchers themselves didn't really understand, how is the system working? It's good to see the accuracy, but how does it work? And they didn't consider it safe for use in the real world. So they built a simpler model, a rules-based system, and it was less accurate on the test data, but it was more intelligible. And one of the things they saw was that the system had learned a surprising rule, which was if the patient had asthma, they were at lower risk of dying from pneumonia. And this didn't make any sense because the doctors knew that actually that's a risk factor for dying from pneumonia. And what they figured out was going on was the system had found a true pattern in the data, which was that patients with asthma, because they're at high risk for asthma, were being admitted to the hospital at a higher rate than other patients. In the hospital, they got excellent care. And as a result, they actually ended up with better outcomes than the population at large. So the system had sort of naively assumed that asthma was the relevant factor, when of course the relevant factor was the readmission to the hospital. But that fact was not in the training set. So the obvious lesson, we need to understand how these systems work when the systems are making consequential decisions about people. And finally, accountability. We are the first generation to bring AI to society. And so it's really incumbent upon us to get this right, to be sure that the people building these systems, the people deploying these systems, are accountable to the public at large. We've been thinking about this quite a bit in the context of facial recognition software. You know, this software, like so much of AI, it has so many potential benefits. It's already been put to use in India to find thousands of missing children and reunite them with their parents. As I said, it can tell blind people who was around them. In a law enforcement context, it can help to keep us safe. But at the same time, now we get into questions of, Big Brother. Our faces are unique. They can't easily be changed. Do we want the government to be able to track us all the time as we move around, even in the name of public safety? Do we want retailers tracking us as we just walk into a store to buy something? And so this is why Microsoft is actually calling for regulation of this field. Some people are surprised to hear a tech company sort of calling for regulation of itself. But we think this is necessary because society needs to make some fundamental decisions about how all of this will be deployed. Those decisions should be reflected in law, which then every company will have to live up to. And even apart from that, while we're waiting for new laws, tech companies need to be accountable. And so we're building our facial recognition systems, at least trying to, in accordance with the principles I've been describing. And we've also taken a decision that we will not deploy facial recognition software in law enforcement contexts where we believe it would put fundamental democratic freedoms at risk. So we're operationalizing all these principles now. We've established a group of senior leaders at Microsoft, forming a committee called Ether. It's an acronym for something. We have academics on it. We have senior engineering leaders. We have 2 people from legal, of which I'm one. And our core work is trying to build out a set of detailed guidelines, which is pretty challenging, but a set of detailed guidelines to put those principles into practice and to really guide our developers as they build products. And then in addition, when particular challenging questions come up, and they do because we're working with so many customers around the world and hearing lots of ideas about how to use AI, this is sort of a study group, and then we make recommendations to the senior leadership team at Microsoft about should Microsoft go forward with the project or not? If we do, under what conditions? So, I've been focusing on the challenging issues that AI can raise. But as I've said, we're only interested in those issues because of so many beneficial uses to which AI can be put. To showcase the possibilities, Microsoft recently embarked on a 5-year, over $100 million plan to work with NGOs and others in the field of environmental improvement, in accessibility, and in humanitarian action to really put AI to use. I've got a short video that highlights a little bit of what we're working on with NGOs in the humanitarian area.
Human rights situation often deteriorate very quickly, and the faster we can get the information and we can react to the situation, it can be a real game changer.
New technologies are advancing so rapidly, and technology companies can advise us on how best to use those technologies to protect and promote human rights.
Our objective is automatic damage mapping because after the disaster, the government needs the damage map to carry out the effective rescue. If we can save the time to grasp the ground damage information, we are able to save a lot of life and facilities.
In a new partnership with the World Bank, United Nations, and tech industry partners, we'll be better able to predict when and where famine will occur.
One of the things I love about Operation Smile missions is that we get to show the children how much we care about them.
You do what you think might be little in your little corner, only to find out that you've changed the lives of the family forever.
We're creating a chatbot-based experience for refugees coming out of the Syria conflict. The purpose is to have displaced youth find a way to discover and access learning materials. You can engage directly with the course content.
It's just the beginning of the impact that we hope to have with the tools at our disposal.
So I have to say, it's really exciting to work on these kinds of projects. Back in the States, I've been working on a project called Legal Navigator for the past couple of years. And this is to help people who can't afford a lawyer be able to access the justice system. People can describe what their problem is in plain language. And people often don't understand sort of if their problem is even a legal problem. And the system is smart enough to understand that input and then direct them to the right resources, including forms and the like that they can fill out to help themselves. So we've been thinking hard about all this for the past couple of years. We've put our thoughts together in a short book called The Future Computed. If you're interested to learn more about our thinking, it's a free download from Microsoft.com, or if you like Kindle, it's out there on the Amazon site for a nominal fee, so I'd encourage you to get it. And I would close by saying, we really need a global dialogue on this topic. And it is happening, so I'd encourage all of you to participate. The OECD in Paris has been doing great work on this. New Zealand, of course, is part of the OECD. They announced a set of principles in draft form just a couple of weeks ago, which will probably be formally approved in May. The partnership on AI was co-founded by Microsoft, IBM, Google, Amazon, and others. And various civil society groups are part of that now, including the AI Now forum. Various academic groups are engaged. So the conversation is happening. I would encourage all of you to join in. And I will end there. Thank you very much.